defining your authentic-ish persona. So that work persona, that person that you become in these situations to really help yourself and help your career grow. And because that's something that I've been practicing for many years, bringing your best self and defining first what that is for that specific goal or situation, and bringing that person. It's not an inauthentic version of yourself, but it's the part of yourself that you want to reveal in this situation to get the best outcome for your specific goal.
Hello and welcome to Creativity for Sale podcast, a show to help you start and grow your life-changing creative career and business. My name is Radim Malinic and creativity changed my life. You see, I believe creativity can change your life too. I even wrote a book about it and it inspired this podcast. I've set out to interview the world's most brilliant creatives, designers, writers, musicians, makers and marketeers about their life-changing experiences with creativity. If you ever wanted to know how people go from their humble beginnings to the pinnacle of their success, our conversation should provide you with an intimate look into triumphs, challenges and untold stories behind their creative endeavors. We also discuss the highs and lows of creative careers and creative life. So, thank you for joining me on this exploration of passion, creativity, innovation and the boundless potential within us all. Let creativity change your life. Are you ready? In this episode, we are back in Canada. My guest today has nearly 2 decades of creative experience to her name. She's the founder and creative director of award-winning creative studio named Design is Yummy, based out of Montreal, Quebec. With a firm belief that the why is more important than the what, she and her team take on diverse projects crafting thoughtful design for brands with heart, offering cohesive design solutions for her clients driving positive change in the communities they serve. Let's explore the world of female founder, entrepreneur, mom, and a speaker on design and the business of it. It's my pleasure to introduce Elana Rudick. Hi, Elana. Nice to have you on the show. How are you doing today?
I'm super excited to be here.
You're my first guest from Quebec, from Montreal. Montreal's got a very, very strong sort of place in my heart. I love the place. I think maybe for the part European architecture, part for the reason that you guys got poutine in McDonald's, it's all the right and wrong reasons that I love. But for those who have never heard of your studio or yourself, can you just introduce yourself really briefly for me?
For sure. So my name's Elana Rudick. And as you mentioned, I'm in Quebec. I'm in Montreal. I have a graphic design studio here, which is called Design is Yummy. We are a branding agency and we are women-led, we're award-winning, and we collaborate with brands that bring people together and make an impact at a community level. So we like to create thoughtful design for brands with heart.
I like the word thoughtful. It already separates you from many others. The premise of this podcast and premise of the book, Creativity for Sale, is the fact that creativity can change your life. What was your first point of entry with creativity? What's your sort of background between the beginnings and Design is Yummy?
Oh, wow. Oh, well, we're going way back. I think I've always enjoyed being creative, even as a kid. And I remember very vividly when the internet came out and my world exploded. And I started doing web design at first in high school. And that kind of got me excited about working with computers. I was also a bit of a geek as a kid and I did programming. And I think that's as far as I got in programming, like the best I ever did was when I was in grade 5 and placed 5th in Quebec in a logo writer contest. Makes me old. So I always enjoyed working creatively and also working with tech and computers specifically. So graphic design made sense to me, but it took a while to get there.
Would you say in any way your surroundings inspired you? Or was it just a sort of natural curiosity? Or because I'm trying to think, every time I've been to Quebec, and obviously I know of some other creatives from Montreal and from around there, there's a strong visual aesthetic.
There is a strong visual aesthetic, and there's actually 2 strong visual aesthetics because there is quite a different style between the Francophone style and the Anglophone style. So even we work a lot with a theater here and we work with an English theater. And the style that we do for them is really different. It's much more, I would say, editorial on the French side. And yeah, growing up, there's definitely visual influences that take place. But I think for me, a lot of that creative backstory came from being within the theater environment. Actually, my family, my parents were in community theater and I was backstage a lot, and that was really inspiring to me. So theater has been like a close to my heart for a long time, but I enjoyed being on stage, but off stage even more with set design and that kind of thing.
So what did you do? Was it musical? Was it plays?
Yeah, I did a lot of musical theater growing up, which is surprising because I think often people would have described me as shy growing up, but then put me on a stage with full of lights and I'm all about it. That was a bit of, I think, a surprise to maybe my parents as well. But I always really enjoyed being on stage and kind of portraying somebody else and that sort of thing. And then when I discovered more of the back end of how a theater runs and all the pieces that go into place, that became even more exciting to me than being front stage.
That's interesting that you mentioned like being somebody else on stage. Because would you say as creatives, when you're working for a client, you actually have to be somebody else. You actually almost have to portray yourself as a part of someone else's team, or like you have to think differently for a while. And that's interesting when you mentioned that connection. So you were on stage, you actually like the backstage a bit more. And would you say there's a sort of natural business curiosity, or because obviously like that more natural to you?
Yeah, I think I've always been entrepreneurial and I come from a family that's quite entrepreneurial as well. My dad's a dentist, dental practice where he ran his own business. My grandmother was a pharmacist. My grandfather had a construction company. My other grandfather had a pest control business. So kind of I was surrounded by people that were self-starters. But even despite that, they actually didn't want me to run my own business, which was quite interesting. I think it was a bit natural seeing those things and wanting to eventually do something on my own. Even I remember I had a mentor at university. And when we were talking about next steps after graduation, and she looked at me and she's, you just got to do your own thing. You just have to run your own business. And I looked at her and thought, you're crazy. Like, I'm not doing that. And it took a few years for me to agree that was the right decision.
I think it's quite scary because I think we all kind of dream about the freedom and being in charge and doing that. But I think it's the first step into the unknown. It's like, really? Me? Really? Do I have to? That kind of stuff. And it's interesting because on the show, like I've recently started this show to decode and decipher for many people on the outside, not even on the outside, on the inside, but not necessarily as far as on their journey, to actually see like how people do go from their humble beginnings into their successes. Because you can see, what did you do? Oh, I graduated and I did a couple of pieces and then I got hired by Damien Hirst as his in graphic. And no one said that, by the way, I'm just making it up. But sometimes it just feels like, what happened? What button did you press? Or what number did you call?
What was that step that takes you from A to B?
Yeah, and it's just almost like, how do you graduate from A to double A? You know, it's just, what did you do? I'm being very conscious of like how I can get this story out of everyone to actually empower people and show them that this stuff happens. Because, as you said, people told you to run your on show, and your parents and your surroundings said no. Because I found through the show again that there's lots of people in our families, in our immediate circles, they don't want us to fail. That's their way to try to protect you.
I'm not even sure if it was trying to protect me as much as knowing that it's hard. I think there's a glamorous outside perspective to running your own business, and people think, oh, wow, it looks so cool. And yes, it is for sure. And there is freedom, but there's also a lot more constraints and responsibility and ties that come with it as well from running all your own shops. That there is freedom, but there's a lot on your shoulders. So I think also maybe they didn't want me to have all that burden sometimes.
Yeah. Isn't it interesting that I think this is still not someone trying to protect you, but it might be hard. But then I think that was the CEO of NVIDIA who said the other day, I just watched his interview and he said, I've got very low expectations. What is he going to say next? So like, oh, very low expectations, but I got very high resilience, because you get people coming out of Stanford and they got very high expectations and very little resilience. Like, you really want to succeed, but it doesn't happen. And you are absolutely heartbroken. Whereas if you hope that no, 1 and 1 is actually 2 at the end of the day, that's a lot of expectation. Okay, just a couple of dots needs to join and we'll be fine. And it just made me think sometimes we really put ourselves into this sort of ambitious anxiety of really wanting to be something really quickly. And we don't have that life experience, especially if we start our little businesses. And it must be quite hard for people now starting their businesses, because everyone seems to be accomplished. Everyone's on the internet. Everyone's making, not supposedly, lots of money, and everyone's doing this sort of thing. You're like, how do I do this? And it reminds me of an anecdote of John Mayer, which is my favorite. Like my favorite talk on creativity is by John Mayer. He was doing a clinic for Berkeley College of Music, and he said, "There's one thing that everyone needs to do, and that's define their expectations." And he's like, "What are you talking about? Define what you want to be. If you want to be a pop artist, your song needs to be, you've got 4 minutes, not even 4 minutes, you've got 3 minutes. You have to tell your whole story and get everything in there. And how many records you're going to sell and how many things." And I'm like, we don't define anything. Like we are so blindly going forward. We go, I'm going to fill in the blanks as I go along. So from your humble beginnings, you're being inspired by the behind the scenes in the theater. Where do we go into defining expectations as a creative?
Yeah, I think my expectations as a creative or just as a human are extremely high. I'm a bit of a perfectionist and I like things to be a certain way. And, I have high expectations of everyone, but most of myself, which is sometimes to my own detriment. You can't be perfect in everything. And I think sometimes that has held me back by trying. Sometimes you get that paralysis, right? When you're trying to make everything so perfect that you end up releasing nothing. So I've definitely had that happen to me before. And that's something that in the last couple of years, really been trying to let go of a bit, not to let go of expectations or trying to make things as great as I can, but taking some of that pressure off myself of saying, you don't have to be the best at this. You just need to try. I've always had a growth mindset, but taking that pressure off a little bit has been something that's freeing creatively and allowed me to experiment. Who says you have to stay in one medium? Who says you have to be this type of creative or that? You can try other things. And for me, I stopped doing that when I thought I had to be perfect at them to start. So I think that's something maybe hopefully your listeners can connect with, is thinking about letting go a little bit and just trying things and seeing what happens.
I think what you describe it means aging, growing, being more mature, because
Yeah.
we all, sorry, it's not aging, it's a sign of, I don't know how to say it before it sounded maybe inappropriate. No, I'm like, the older I got, the better creative I became without even trying to be better creative, because you open yourself to other horizons, other opinions, because we jump into creative world with very much blinkered view. Because after all, our industry is driven by ego, ambition, anxiety, and insecurity in equal measure. Like we want to do this, we leave companies because we don't get enough credit for the work that we just about did, and we feel like I need to be appreciated, I need to be doing this because like we feel we are the center of the orbit. Whereas when you realize I'm part of the collective orbit and we do this together and I can influence it, I can make it better without necessarily losing friends or hair or growing wrinkles. So perfectionism is interesting that you feel like you're hard on yourself and you go high expectations, because I think I've gone back to from really high expectation like yourself to anything goes. We'll see where it takes us, because I think that's a nice surprise with compromise. When you think about the world, everything's compromised, where it takes you. So what is the mindset shift that you're letting yourself to accept things that they could be something even different?
I think part of that is honestly being a parent and having kids and saying to my kids, I love making art with my kids and allowing them to express their creativity and seeing what they come up with. I find their art is very inspiring to me. And I hear myself saying to them, it doesn't have to be perfect. I love what you've done here. Or like, oh, they tried something new and I'm really intrigued by it. And then hearing myself say that so many times to other people made me turn that inward and say, well, if I'm able to do this for somebody else, why can't I do it for myself too? How come I don't expect them to be perfect and I allow them the freedom of creativity and play, but I don't allow myself? So when you're in the studio scene day by day and you're running a business, it's very easy to focus all your energy on that. And I love the entrepreneurial side of things. Like I love client relations. I love putting out fires. I love dealing with those crazy emails. Like I love the deadlines, all of it. But I wasn't allowing myself enough space for play, which I think is so important as a creative to keep yourself energized and not burn out.
I like that you said it's because of having kids. I love that.
Yeah. They've taught me a lot.
I would agree. I think I love the fact when, I'm sure your kids do the same, like, what are you drawing? Zebra. I'm thinking, where do you even begin to draw a zebra or giraffe? And like, if you know a few brush strokes, here it is. What's the question? What do you mean? Of course, this is the stuff. And it's just that beautiful, unfiltered energy because they haven't been, they haven't realized they need to think in a certain way just to build, not to try to be accepted or belong somewhere. It's that unfiltered energy, which is, I think, is, if we were to retain it, we might not get much as a collective human race because like we need to compromise. We need to find a common ground because when you got two young kids or three young kids, like sometimes to find a common ground is impossible because they all believe they are right. So it's like, how do you tap into the right stuff and the right mixture? Are you with your kids? Are you one of those parents that corrects their work or do you just let them do it?
I let them do their thing. And I really enjoy sitting back and seeing what they create on their own because as a creative, I think it's so important to design with context and educate yourself on what's going on around you and be aware. But there's also something really beautiful in just watching that self expression come from within and without outside influence. So they're not comparing like their zebra that they made on Instagram next to 5,000 other zebras. So they can put it up there and say, of course, this is a zebra with confidence and feel really proud. And I think that's something that we could all learn from of, yes, it's fun to sometimes go down that rabbit hole of what's out there online, but then at a certain point you have to shut it down and just go inward. And I've really been enjoying kind of rediscovering creativity that comes from within and making art for me. I stopped doing that for many years and was only doing commercial work and work that was paying the bills. And I think part of that is saying, at what point is enough for me from a business side? Like, at what point do I give back to myself too? That's really been helping me just get back into it.
That's interesting. I had this dangerous thought mind the other day, and it was that if you need a side project to satisfy a creative calling, then you're in the wrong job. It was just like, it was a little bit too cutthroat. If you really need to do something outside work, are you in the right place? Because I think in this current day and age, you can be doing anything. There's so many bizarrely creative or like outrageously creative studios that you can do anything. So you're like, why would people do that? But then as a business owner, you've got tiny windows to be creative. And I think I'm curious how much time you spend about that hour, 20 minutes, if you got creative time at, like, in that short window, how much time do you spend actually thinking about the stuff?
I have a billion and one ideas of things that I would like to do. And I know life is short and you don't get to all of them. And I'm trying to also filter of what makes the most sense. And sometimes in my mind, like I would say I have strong confidence in my abilities in my head. And I'll say, oh, look at that. I can totally do that. And then I'll try it and say, oh my God, actually, I hate doing this or this isn't fun for me. But giving myself the space to try those things has been exciting. But I think about all kinds of different projects all the time, even dropping my kids off at school. As a designer, you're always looking for those kind of pain points and how you can make an experience better on anything you touch, packaging in the grocery store, whatever you're touching, you always want to try and improve or solve a problem. My brain is running creatively 24/7. It's just about finding the time and deciding what's actually worthwhile to pursue or what's maybe just in my head a good idea.
I think when we tell ourselves when we're younger that when you have an idea, you have to jump on the idea. I'm going to make it. I'm going to spend as many hours as you can. Way to work hard, creative and polished and perfected after all. But there's this beautiful cognitive dissonance that sometimes we wish didn't exist, is that you're like, I've got an idea. I've got 20 minutes, 6 o'clock this evening. I'm going to give it a shot then. And by the time you get to that 6 o'clock for those 20 minutes, the idea is completely different. It's already evolved. You're going to try it for a little bit. Well, okay, I better jump. I need to do something else. And obviously, normally, like 20 years ago, I'd be kicking and screaming, the life is unfair. Whereas you find yourself with those 20 minutes each and not every other day, making the idea so much better because you got that period of reflection. I'm not sure how to do this particular bit, so I'm going to work it out. I'm going to think about this. I'm going to look up a YouTube tutorial. And I find it beautifully rewarding that stuff that could have been a creative block, like you don't have a plan, you don't define your expectations. You're just thinking, I've got this idea. It's definitely like brilliant in my head. So do you find this process similar? Do you feel that you sort of overthink it chisel it better.
Yeah, I think ideas and creative evolves over time, and sometimes it needs that rush to get it out if you have a few minutes, and then you need to percolate on it a little bit. But something I don't believe in is creative block. I feel like it's a crutch and something that completely doesn't exist. And I think part of that is being able to help designers over the years in my studio through their creative blocks and see that it really is true. It's not just for me that you can remove that completely from your vocabulary if you just take a little space or do something entirely different or get somebody else's feedback on it. Or there's so many ways to get past it that I really enjoy the process, especially collaborating with other people when somebody has like I have let's say a visual idea in my head of how I want to attack a brief. And then a client has a completely different idea and another designer I'm working with has a completely different idea, and it evolves and takes a totally different shape by the end. But I think that's like the magic of creativity. Where is it going to go? I'm not sure. And the picture we have in our head as visual artists may look amazing in our minds, and we put it on paper and go, oh my God, this is not the solution. So I think that's more fun when it evolves.
So that's something that we just mentioned that three people might have three different visions. And I think I used to have many of those, but I somehow divorced myself from the idea that it needs to be certain things certain way. Because I'm sure we are all guilty of accepting work, but like, this is going to look great in my portfolio. And what happens? It fucking doesn't. Because it just never really happens to be the thing that somebody sees. Like we see people who are almost uneducated in creative process with creative ideas going, I really like that piece of work that you've got there. I want something similar. Of course, it ends up being totally wildly different. And you're like, okay, so I've taken a project because it meant to look good in my portfolio. Who cares about your portfolio? Like literally, it never works out. And the stuff that just doesn't promise anything because you got open mind, you're happy to compromise. It turns out to be portfolio project. And I think it's just that like thing, you allow yourself to be wrong about your opinions. You allow yourself to be open-minded about what the outcome could be, because if you don't know what you're looking for, that makes it more exciting, because if you're looking for a particular outcome, you really have to line up all your ducks to do that. So how often do you accept projects for your portfolio, and how often does it not work out?
I think I would say that we're lucky, half luck, half hard work. Nothing I think is truly by luck, but we have a lot of client work, thankfully. And so at the end of the day, we always have stuff for our portfolio. We have too much for our portfolio, so we can choose. And sometimes you think a project's going to work out really well and it doesn't, and that's okay. But I think going back to what you said earlier about allowing the work to become what it's going to be, I think that goes back to ego. And as a young designer coming in, I think a lot of designers think, oh, I got this, I know everything. And it's so important to let that go and make that part of your process too. The client isn't always right, but sometimes they are. Sometimes they know their audience better than you do and better than your research. And you need to allow that space for their feedback too. And sometimes a client says something, I'm like, oh, that's going to look terrible. I don't want to do that. And then we kind of appease them and try it out anyways. And I think, okay, we'll try their solution. We'll try a medium solution. Then we'll try what we think they should be doing and then see what we end up presenting. And sometimes their ideas are better than you think, or it pushes you creatively in a different direction that you might otherwise go. And I think it's important to be open to everybody's ideas and just letting go a little and then trusting your gut of what actually works.
You mentioned young designers. We've all been young designers, and it's funny to be lecturing at universities, and they're like, yeah, I'm already freelancing and this client wants me to make it this color. I'm like, and you make it that color. You don't know their back catalog. You don't know what else they've got. If you think it needs to be blue, you keep it blue for yourself. But you just don't know what you don't know. And I think we need that blind, strong fuel to go, I think I know, I've got all the answers. I'm here. I've got a gear. I'm eager. But it's almost like, how do we find that sort of that happy medium, that compromise of ego and ambition and insecurity and anxiety? Like, how do we get it right there? It sometimes we understand it quicker, we absorb and digest it quicker, because it takes a few years before you say, that was a bit of a silly time, wasn't it? I didn't really have to make all those fires and didn't have to then have battles over it and jousting with people, because there's that sort of development. There's that way of working on ourselves and working with others and understanding the process. And somehow I wish there was a way of improving that understanding of how things work, because unless you have a good, strong mentor or a strong leader, I think it's quite hard.
It is hard. Yeah. I think it takes time to develop your gut and then start to trust that gut, and also getting clients to trust you. When you're freelancing and you're just starting, a client is going to be much more reticent or push back a lot more than when you have a big portfolio behind you and lots of clients that are saying nice things about you, and, oh, you should really just trust them. So over the years, it does get easier. If there are times that we want to push back and say, I really think we have a stronger idea this time, clients will listen more now than they would, let's say, 15 years ago when I first started the studio. It's a totally different game. So I get that it takes time, but I remember going back to what you're saying of like, why not just try the color the client is asking instead of just pushing back right away? One of the first freelance gigs that I got was because an internal team refused to make it was a holiday campaign, and they refused to make it any other color than red because red is for holidays. And I was like, and you can do another color for holidays. So I came in, they're like, yeah, our team really doesn't want to change the color and we're struggling with it. I said, I'll try any color you want. Let's make something that makes sense for you. And that ended up being like a great long-term project where I got to see my work in stores across the country. And I was like, all right, we're getting somewhere here. You never know, just testing something out and listening to another person where it leads.
I remember doing work for some college in Ontario in my illustration days. I used to have an illustration agent in Montreal called Elana Rudick for quite a while. And I remember they gave us the colors for some illustrations. And it's just some color just doesn't inspire you. It was like green or green, yellow, red, and blue. And I'm like, I don't like those colors. Like, they don't inspire me. They're just quite safe, corporate sort of college colors. I just tweaked them. I just tweaked the red to be more exciting red and the blue to be more exciting blue. And they're like, it followed the theme. So I think there's always a way that you can actually help yourself and tweak stuff. So yeah, I'm glad that you managed to do your holiday campaign in the way you could. I want to ask you a question. You mentioned at the beginning of our conversation that you go graphic design studio, which in my view and observation and current experience, it's almost like a rare breed to say I've just got graphic design studio, because everyone of late is either subscription, full stack. It's a bit like, Starbucks menu, like ginger latte, spice, cinnamon, skinny, whatever. Like, we just have all of these, so many things that have stacked up to our name. Defining your expectations with graphic design studio, is there a long runway? Graphic design, where do you see the future of graphic design?
Oh, that's a big question. I think the beginning I would say we're still at the beginning of a big change in design industry in general. AI, every tool is changing constantly every week, new tutorials and new ways of doing things. I can't predict exactly how that's going to roll out in the future, but I think it's something to embrace and to become part of the process. And I am traditionally a print designer, but we do a lot of digital work as well. And I enjoy it too, but I know there are studios that list a long services list of all the billions of things that they do, but that's not us. And I'd rather be honest about what we're good at and focus on what we're really good at. And yes, we educate ourselves and look to the future and look at how we can continue to grow our skills. I think that's important to keep learning, but it's also important to be honest about, okay, here's where I can push myself, but I'm not this. That's okay to define yourself as saying. You can define yourself. It was interesting, actually, a common friend of ours, David Nuff, had said to me at one of the Design Thinkers conferences that he liked to define himself more by what he's not than by what he is.
He goes deep most of the time.
Very deep.
When you talk about informing yourself about the latest sort of tools and developments, I think that's super important, because you can actually see what you can cherry pick and what you can use. But obviously our work is driven by the client requirements. Obviously you can be excited, you can be curious, you can be like the mindset of an advertising agency who just tries to latch in the latest tech so they can win an award on being like the most innovative campaign, which to most people out there means absolute forgo. Yeah, okay, nice tech stuff, whatever. But it's as that, and it's driven by client requirements. So with the work that you guys do, as you say, there's digital work and there's print designers. How is it in proportion, like the print versus digital? Is it still quite high proportion, or analog work? It's not analog, but analog output.
Yeah, I would say so. Compared to some other studios I've spoken with, we're still about 50% print, which is, I think, a bit more rare these days. But yeah, we still thankfully get a lot of print projects. And right now I don't see them disappearing. I mean, I think they'll slowly evolve to maybe be more in a digital format when we're doing a lot of annual report books or documents or brochures and things. Yes, they're going to be more digital. People are printing fewer runs these days and they're printing things that are a bit more high end and I would say precious versus before where it was huge quantities. So now it's a bit more specialized, but that also gives us room to get creative with our print projects.
Now, your clients, you mentioned two influences.
Anglophone and francophone. So anglophone means that you're native English speaking and francophone native French speaking.
So, do you have clients on both sides?
We do. And we have clients outside of Quebec as well. I would say, though, the majority of our clients are English speaking, probably just because those are the spaces I network in a bit more, or because I am English speaking to start, but a lot of our work is bilingual, trilingual, and beyond. We've have even a pharmaceutical client where we've translated packaging into 11 different languages. But being bilingual designers does certainly help in spaces where, if we are working in the States, for example, we're very well versed at English, Spanish packaging and things like that. So we know how to tackle multiple language. We actually do a lot of work for the Cree Nation. So it ends up being English, French, and Cree syllabic. So it's an indigenous population.
That's beautiful to know. Wow. That's fascinating because I was always fascinated with, obviously, with Montreal being bilingual and having strong identities about English first and French first. And you talk about the fact that Francophones are more editorial. How do you think is that there's a lot, like the more I speak to with Canadian designers, like the editorial is a strong feeling, and people make zines and people make magazines and that kind of stuff. Do you know the answer? Why?
I don't know if I know the answer. I think maybe it's just being a bit more experimental on the French side. I think there's definitely a cultural difference between English and French here. Although we all get along, there is definitely something that I love about the French community is that real joie de vivre, like that zest for life, that love of life. And I think maybe that lends to being a bit more experimental in the arts. Yeah, there's a strong scene here of all the tech companies. A lot of my friends that work in Ubisoft and Warner Brothers and all that stuff, they are local. I don't know if it's an outside influence, but I know people here love to travel and love to experience new cultures. And I think because we're quite a multicultural city, we're used to looking to outside influences and trying new things. So maybe that's more of what it is than other people working here.
Got it. Okay. So talking about influences, what does inspire in the current scene?
There's probably two types of work that I would love to do, which is probably a lot of designers would answer this though, book covers and spirits labels. That's two projects that I would love to add to the roster for sure.
Spirit labels, I always get a bit intimidated by those because I know some people who do them so extremely well. What is it about spirit labels that makes you feel something?
I think it's just the artistry in them. And also, yes, there are some that are series, but I love the idea of also creating a one off where you can just experiment and try something new and different. And when you're doing corporate work, you don't always have that. You're sticking to, depending on the brand, but oftentimes you're sticking within certain constraints. And I like the variety. And for me, I think that's fun to, especially with a book cover or something, to just do something experimental and different. I think that allows for a lot of creative freedom and play. So we get to do a little bit of that with the theater work that we do when we're creating production posters because it's for a specific production, but it still has to fit within a larger series. So I think the whole idea of just getting to create something that's just a one sounds very exciting to me.
It reminds me when you talk about book covers and spirit labels, it's almost like you go back to really old engraving, Victorian engraving, that kind of stuff. And it almost stems from the same sort of root, from the same source. So when you talk about experimental work, what do you do with your studio to keep things exciting? Because you talk about corporate work, you talk about theater, but you guys go on team days out and try new things or get dirty with paint and that kind of stuff. How do you keep the morale of your troops creatively?
So we do a lot of lunch and learns. As you know, we recently watched your Off Barcelona talk. That was one of our lunch and learns, which was fantastic. So we try and keep it interesting where we're always learning something new. We'll try something. We'll do workshops where we do get our hands dirty. I think it's important as a creative to do things that are not just digital, but try things with your hands. We definitely go to team outings and team building, things like that. Our clients, when they have launches or events, like we work with an amazing foundation called Myra's Kids Foundation, who help children that are experiencing grief and loss of a loved one that's close. So we do some work with them, and they have a fundraiser next week that we're going to go to. So that kind of thing also helps with team building, just to see your work together as a team out there and how people interact with it, I think is a really fun thing to do. But yeah, lunch and learns, we've been doing them for many years. Even during the pandemic, we had lots of virtual speakers that would come and join us, like Amanda Mochi. She came, Eleni Biviratu. She tested out a few of her talks with us, which was super fun. So we really love that, just connecting with other creatives and, from different industries and professions. Actually, we had a dietitian that once came to talk to us about fueling yourself creatively, like literally fueling yourself healthy. So we go in diverse places, but I find that sparks conversation as a team and gets us to really know each other and learn about each other versus like the standard like water cooler talk that you get in a day.
You seem incredibly connected, like define it. Did you ever find networking or getting out there a bit frightening?
Of course. So as a kid, I mentioned earlier that I would definitely define myself as shy, and so would have a lot of other people. But I think it was a bit of to my own detriment by constantly when you label yourself anything, especially when you're younger, it becomes hard to break free of that. And so I think it's important to be flexible with how you label yourself. You might be shy in a certain situation, or maybe my shyness was just a version of being introverted at times, or quiet, or perceptive, or taking things in a little bit, thoughtful. And it took me a long time to get past that. But when you're starting a business, as you do need to get yourself out there, nobody's going to know who you are or what you do or hire you for any if they can't find you. I did a lot of networking when I first started my business, and it was terrifying and still sometimes feels a little scary depending on the crowd you're with. I was often the only creative with very corporate corporate clients, corporate world. I was also very young when I started my business, and being in my 20s and being in rooms with people in their 40s, 50s that were very established and like decision makers in their business, that was terrifying. But continuously doing it and practicing, you get better at it and you learn to roll with it a bit more. And that certainly helped me in my creative career of being able to connect with other people, no matter who they are or how established they are. At our core, we're all people that just are looking for connection and realness and real conversation. That's something that I've learned to really enjoy with clients or with anything else. Like you can learn so much from just talking with somebody and things that you didn't expect. So I love that.
I think those networking events that you describe, like with people who have no idea what you do. So you do what? And is it that? All right, okay, what is it? And sometimes you think it's almost going to networking events. Sometimes when you need some new work, you're like, I hope they love me. It's like, I hope I pick my partner for life on a blind date, or I just know marriage at first sight kind of thing. Because we go into these things with expectations. Whereas if you don't really give a monkey's toss, yeah, I'm here. I want to see what other people are in the room and what you can do, because most of networking is done like finding love on demand, and that never works. It never really works. And you just go into situations where you're just like, I'm here by accident in a totally wrong room. That doesn't always happen. But you mentioned that you felt shy at the beginning. Am I an introvert? But again, I think it comes with age. I always believe that there's a hope for people who are like younger, and they're like, everything feels a bit scary because you haven't done some certain things more than once. It's just, oh, I haven't networked. I haven't come up to a famous designer more than once. Or it feels a bit, I think kids get, I say kids, I'm 46, but I think we go to Gen Zers who've got a lot more sort of perceived confidence than we ever used to have in our early 20s. We would not imagine ourselves running a YouTube channel, giving tutorials or whatever, like reeling all the time. But shy, introvert, and now happy doing this is basically like defining your experience, right? Because you know yourself more. You're not necessarily put out by not scoring the next big piece of work in the networking event, because You more or less, we just go there just to have a chat, right? So how did you see that process of going from shy and introverted into, hey, here I am, let's do this?
I think it's practice, really. I think that's really what it comes down to is proving to yourself if you're scared of something and you've never done it before. The first time you do it, sure, it's scary, but now the second time you go do the same thing, you've already done it once. You have that proven track record of, okay, I've already done this, it's less scary. And the more and more you do things that scare yourself, I think the better you get at it. And what's the worst thing that happens? Especially like I'm a very clumsy person. So in networking, like all kinds of things, I've fallen downstairs, I've spilled all over myself. And if you can get past doing those things, then when it does go well, you're like, hey, look at that. I'm successful. But I think it's scarier to me now not to put myself out there than it is to put myself out there because you can lose such huge opportunities. And now when I'm networking, I'm much more strategic about it. When I walk into a room, I know exactly who I'm going to speak to. I know exactly what I want to say. And then the rest, I'm excited when unknown conversations come up and you connect with somebody for real more than you thought you would. But usually I have a plan in mind when I'm doing those things because after a few years, you get better at it.
I like you say strategic. Define your expectations, define your time, define your experience. I like it a lot. The transition between being shy, introverted, not only in us coming up to people and say, hey, this is what we do, this is what I do, this is who I am. Given talks, where do you see the role of festivals, talks, keynotes in our collective progress and development?
I think it's huge. I think it's huge, especially for young designers and for more senior designers too, to be able to give back and impart some lessons that I wish I had learned or somebody had said to me when I was younger. If it helps somebody else feel less shy or somebody else see, maybe I can do this too. Oh, she got past this. Maybe I can as well. I think we have a responsibility to help younger designers. And I think the experience for young designers to be at those events is huge. And as somebody that's more senior as well, it gives you so much joy. There's a reason that people speak at events and continue doing it versus doing it one time and then running away. It's because you're getting something back too. It's really enjoyable and fun. So I think it's super important to keep communities connected and especially for the design community to stay connected because the younger designers that are coming through the ranks now, the tools that they have available that we just didn't have when we started and what they're doing with it is fascinating. So I think it's important to keep those communications open and collaborate with each other.
Absolutely. When this comes out, you will have already done your Design Thinkers talk in Vancouver.
And it will have gone awesome.
It would have been awesome. So can you share with me what's the topic of your talk? What you're going to share? So I'm always curious because, like we all know the talks we don't want to do, gender portfolio ones. What is the topic? Because you can't beautifully explain what we need to do with it. So what are you going to share on the stage?
Yeah, so I'm going to be talking about defining your authentic-ish persona. So that work persona, that person that you become in these situations to really help yourself and help your career grow. And because that's something that I've been practicing for many years is learning we always have so many things that we're juggling as people, as humans. For me, it's being a mom, an entrepreneur, a designer, a creative director, managing clients, all the other things going on in my life. And it's bringing your best self and defining first what that is for that specific goal or situation and bringing that person. It's not an inauthentic version of yourself, but it's the part of yourself that you want to reveal in this situation to get the best outcome for your specific goal. So that's what I'm going to be trying to help people with in that workshop is trying to define who that person is for themselves so that they can reach their goals.
So do I sense there's a bit of a restraint of, like you said, the person that you want to bring to the situation? So
100%.
that's very interesting.
The business Elana, the design Elana is not the at home with my kids Elana. They're the same person, but very different sides of myself are shown. And I think that's honestly what helps me be less shy in business situations is because I'm not putting all of myself out there. I'm not completely vulnerable and open. It's the parts of myself that will serve the situation that are open. And then I can really hone in on those parts. And if I'm going into something and I'm using that strategy hat, okay, I'm going to use it to the best of my ability for that situation.
That's interesting. Do you ever find or would you agree with what I'm going to say next, that whenever you find a new client and you got a first meeting, it's like basically being on a first date. No one's themselves. Like the client's got all the money and all the opportunities and all the willingness, and there's never going to be a compromise. And the designer goes, of course, we love this, and we just got to decide it's going to look great in our portfolio. And then it's almost like we should just discard that first conversation and go, okay, so now we've met, we like each other, and we want to work with you, we want to work for you. Should we start again this conversation? Because your idea is not exactly amazing. Like, it needs work, the budget's not exactly the greatest. And sometimes you find so like, we are not ourselves at the first encounter. Like it takes almost like a life's journey to actually say, you know what? I can see here through the signals. I can see that you tried to commission this work before, it didn't work. You spend your money. Now you're back paddling. Like, how do you do it? As you said, like your family self is different to the business self. And do you look out for signals with clients, like especially with like a new contact like that? Do you try to be a bit of a sort of therapist and psychoanalyst and business expert?
I think part of being a business owner, you do end up becoming part therapist, right? Because you're tending to the needs and the wants and whatever's going on for your clients, your designers, and all that. You do end up becoming somebody that listens. And I know therapists do a lot more than that. I'm not belittling the profession at all, but you do end up wearing some of that hat. But to be honest, in the first interaction with a client, same as dating, like I'm the same day one as I am day 100. So if I would say something to a client, I'm not crazy about this idea, on the fifth phone call, I'm going to say it on the first. So that's why I'm saying it is an authentic version of yourself, because I will be myself in that business scenario on day one, the same day 300, the same day 500. It's always going to be me being honest. And I hope that clients are going to want to hire us because we're honest. And to me, it was the same in dating. When I met my husband, I was the same blunt person on day one that I am today. I think it's important to show up as yourself so they don't feel like there's a disconnect, like, oh, you wouldn't be honest like this with us in the beginning. Like, I would find that strange. I would rather tell a client the way I feel in the beginning.
Even though it might not go the right way, but I like it.
There's being delicate. Just because you're being honest with somebody doesn't mean you have to say it in a harsh way that, like, oh, your idea is crap. Like, that's really not going to get you very far with a client. But explaining why and giving them some insight as to why you think it won't work, I think is important.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think it's easy to shoot something that you've just seen into pieces, whereas just it takes time to be more eloquent and more convincing about what you know from your professional experience. So that thing is sometimes so you get our young designers who are definitely their authentic selves. They just can't back it up. Which is like, why is it wrong? No, why is it wrong idea? Because I just decided to. Whereas when you have, as you say, when you got insights and experience, it makes things a lot different. So if you're running a business, being a parent and all the stuff, what gets you, is there space for your own, which we talked about your sort of your own ideas and stuff, but is there space for writing a book, or is there space for creating the next piece?
Yeah, you and I have spoken briefly about this before. It's definitely on the horizon. I would love to write a book, and I've started already dabbling here and there. I would love to do more speaking engagements. That's next on the horizon as well. And yeah, there's always space. I think when my mom used to always say, if you want something done, ask a busy person, because they know how to manage their time and lock things in. So there's always a million things I want to do, and hopefully I'll get to more of them.
Is there a thing about a book? What sort of book does the world need that from Elana, that only can Elana write?
I think actually a lot of what we're talking about today, that side of running a creative business, I think there's a lot that I wish I had read when I first started. There's always some great books out there. Adrian Shaughnessy's How to Be a Graphic Designer Without Losing Your Soul. That was like my Bible. And when I read it a few years into freelance, I was like, why didn't I see this sooner? But I think there's more room in that space for other voices as well.
Yeah, I think writing books for yourself, for your younger self, I think is the best sort of antidote to that experience. Like I wish that thing existed. So if you create it, you put it out there, and then you watch people making their own mistakes anyway. And can you pick the book up now because you need it now? Because you obviously would have been helpful for you at that moment just to save yourself some time. But no, I'm excited. I think I like that. Ask a busy person. I think it's a clever way of going around, getting information out of people for sure. Cool. If I'm in Montreal next, what should I do and see? Like for those who have never been, I'll do that. But what have I missed on my list of things to see?
I'm a big foodie. Design is yummy, right? Is the name of the business. So food is always on my mind. So there's lots of places that I can take you to. But if you haven't been to the Orange Julep, it's delicious. Those drinks, they're like a sugary orange. It's like an orange juice, but it's not. It's full of sugar and kind of frosted. It's very good. And Montrealers will tell you it's this big it's the building is in the shape of a big orange. So if you ever drive on DeCarry or the highway, you'll see it and wonder what it is. And in the front, there's a restaurant, but there's been so much speculation since I'm a kid of what goes on upstairs. Growing up, I heard all kinds of stories about what happened on the second floor of the Orange Julep, and I have all these crazy ideas of what used to happen there. So that's a fun place. I like places that have food and stories.
You just did exactly that. I'm intrigued. Well, thank you very much. Orange Julep sounds fantastic.
And Wednesdays in the summer, they have old car night, vintage car night. And they used to have people serving food on roller skates, which is fun. But maybe there was some kind of, I'm making up a story now, but in my mind, there was some sort of lawsuit or liability. So the roller skates are gone.
Wow. Yeah. It only takes one person to not care properly and the carnage happens. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. I enjoyed finding more about you because obviously we've met a couple of times and we talk, and it's nice to go deep and find more about people and especially how they're working, what makes them excited.
Thank you so much for having me. This was super fun and always fun to connect with other creatives. And I love your podcast. So I'm excited to hear from all your next guests as well.
Amazing. Thanks so much. We'll speak soon. Thank you for listening to this episode of Creativity for Sale podcast. The show was produced and presented by me, Radim Marnich. Editing and audio production was masterfully done by Neil Mackay from 7 Million Bikes Podcasts. Theme music was written and produced by Robert Summerfield. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the podcast, please subscribe and leave a rating or review. To get your own action plan on how to start and grow a life-changing creative business, you can get a copy of Creativity for Sale book via the links in show notes. As always, keep those creative fires burning, and until next time, I'm Radim Marnich, your guide through this exploration of passion, creativity, innovation, and the boundless potential within us all.